Hello, howdy, hello. Welcome to another episode of I Talk Shit About Stuff I've Done. That's what I should actually call it. Apologies once again for the hair. I just got out the shower and had dinner and I'm fucking lazy, so blow me. What I want to talk about is a couple of things I have done with the game engine recently that I think is kind of interesting, and as a result I'd like to share them with pretty much no one. But here we go. The first thing I wanted to talk about is I use the word design extraordinarily loosely, but I designed and implemented a signal and slot system inside the game engine. And the excellent thing about this, as opposed to something like Boost's or Qt's signal and slot system, and I was talking about this when I was implementing it, I did a Twitch stream when I was doing a little bit of this stuff, that the main difference between the way they do it and the way I do it, well, I can speak about Qt. I'm not too sure about Boost's one, but Qt's one, it requires you to do a mock on the file. So meta object compiles. It runs a preprocessor step, pre-processing step over your code, and unless you're using something like CMake or you just like a challenge, it's a pain in the fucking ass to really go. Or unless you're of course using Qt Creator, which, I mean, it's okay, but it's fairly trash compared to something like Visual Studio, in my opinion. Take that with a grain of salt. I'm gonna take my glasses off because you can see my lazy eye better. Less reflection. I'll just put it back on because I can't fucking see. So let's talk about that for a second. So what is a signal and slot system? Okay, think about it like this. It's like an event-driven programming almost. So let's just say, like, one example I've actually got implemented is I have something you can click. And how do you get notified when something gets clicked? Well, generally you would have to subclass something or write a callback or a function pointer or something stupid like that, and that can be a bit of a pain in the ass, especially when you want to just literally run a button. So the example I have here is if I push I, my inventory grid opens up. Yes, I know it's trash, just bear with me. If I click any one of these inventory squares, it's going to close the inventory. Now, if I was to use a traditional thing, I'd have to maybe subclass it, and I'd have a pure abstract function. An abstract function. It's a pure abstract class, something different. An abstract function of like on click or on hover or on mouse down or something like that. That would be called, and I'd have to overwrite that to sort of work out when and where the click function will go. And that can be a pain in the ass, because really I don't care when it's clicked. I just need to know. I don't want to do something special. I just want to know it's clicked. And it doesn't even get sent to the button itself. The button itself doesn't really care that it's being clicked. The event itself gets sent to the inventory, or the display manager for the inventory, which I've got open over here, which I'll show you in a second. So that's what that is. Okay, so how does it work? Well, I have a bunch of macros. Now, this is the downside to this approach as opposed to something like Qt's approach, whereas Qt's approach is done dynamically. So there is one connect statement, which is a function. It does really weird like string compares and stuff, which I really hate. It makes things extraordinarily difficult to debug, because you're basically wrapping the function in a define that turns it into a string, which is all well and good, except it also does the same thing for the variables. And what can happen is, especially like at work, I use I think about 3 or 4 different namespaces. And of course, when you write a signal, it's local to the class, so the namespace doesn't need to be there. So it'll be like button, and Then if you're in another namespace and you have a button, and you want to go, oh, I don't want to use the whole namespace. I'm just going to, go namespace : button. That doesn't work because that is not a string perfect match, which is a real pain in the ass. I've run into that trouble quite a few times. And since I ran into the trouble of using namespaces, I really hate that I have to do that. The other issue is it does a bunch of extra code. And it's a bit messy. It's really hard to debug it when you're going through stepping through the debugger. It does weird stuff. Sometimes it does it on the same thread, sometimes it does it on a different thread, and all other stuff fair enough. It's had its own threading thing. It's actually pretty good, the threading engine on Qt, but I don't quite like that. But the upside is there is one connect command. It takes two objects, a signal, and a slot. That's it. Whereas my one, because it's all done via macros, I have one for 0 arguments, one for 1 argument, one for 2 arguments, one for 3 arguments, etc., 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 all the way up to 10. Now, the general way this works is you have a signal called name, and we're going to create a list of functions, callbacks, called whatever the name is, and 0 subscribers. The reason it's done like that, because if you have a signal it has two different types. So one with maybe it emits with 0 signal or 0 attributes, and it emits it with 1 attribute. Like you send it with a this pointer. If you tried to do that, you'd have to give it a different name. So this one, you can have the same name, and it makes a lot more sense. You just have to give it a different call, it's a different function call to actually make a command. I'll show you that in a second. And all it does is it creates a private list of functions that are subscribed to it, a public function which calls all of the subscribers when you call it, and then this is a function to actually add it to the list. Now, I haven't tested this with private slots. I really should. I'm pretty sure it'll work, but at the moment, I'm only using public slots. But that's fine. So here we go, the connect function. The connect function is literally just, it'll bind. Now, if you haven't used std bind before, what it does is it takes a function and turns it into a function pointer, but you can also assign some of the variables preemptively. Now, in the case of a member function, you want this because if you have, in the case of this guy here, there's 25 inventory squares, there's 25 signals, all exactly the same, and they all take a this pointer. So you want to know what what you're actually sending the signal to. If you've ever seen a member function sort of expanded, so if you have a member functions like say void do something int a, this actually gets expanded to void do something class star this. Okay, why did I say that? So you have to actually fill in this first pointer so it knows what function it's actually calling on which object. So that's what this bind does. It actually binds the local function to the this pointer. So it actually fills in the this pointer, which is great. And then it just goes the emitter, which is this guy here, name add, which is this function here, the function we just bound. That's basically all it does. Then I have this define here. It's just basically like a code beautifier. Emit, it just defines to nothing. So that when we go over here, we have a bunch of signals defined. Now this is where I said you can have like two different types of signals. So we have clicked, which is the only one I really have hooked up at the moment. It has a this pointer and a button, or it just has a button. You can hook up to whichever one you want. Now I've got it hooked up to just the button because I don't care at the moment which one it's clicked. I think anyway. Yes. Yes. Yes, okay. And over here, when we want to actually say the signal has been triggered, we're basically just calling the name and sticking the variables in. So it's all it is a function. This emit does literally nothing. It just sort of visually represents what's happening. And this works really well. So in the inventory, I have a function, inventory square clicked, which takes, and you can see the namespacing is different here too, which is a good example of what I was trying to say before. So this is not namespaced, and this is, but because this is done at compile time rather than at runtime, and it's not done through a silly string check, it just works. The other advantage of it being done at compile time is if you get something wrong, it throws up a compile error, which, considering how many times I've gone through like the startup process and done a couple of actions until we get to the part where I'll actually fail, it's a pain in the fucking ass when that happens. Anyway, so all it is just a normal function that takes the arguments. You can call it whatever you want. I've called it via my calling scheme, and all it does is it toggles the enable, which I'll go into in a minute. The other thing I've done. And here we're actually creating the grid. At the moment, the grid is 5 by 5. So we're creating a new button. We're assigning it a sprite. That's just something I've done. And then I'm going to connect up the signal. It's always the same call. So we're connecting up the current button, the clicked signal to this thing's inventory square clicked. Now, unfortunately, another issue with doing it at compile time is you got to give it a syntax that the bind function knows. So I can't just say inventory square clicked or at inventory square clicked, at and ampersand, whatever. It has to be the full qualified one, which it can be a bit of a pain in the ass, oops. But, I mean, trade-offs. I'm fine with that. And unfortunately, there's no like underscore class, underscore macro, like there is file or line is the other one that I use. But apparently they're adding that in Visual Studio, C++ like 19 or 18 or something. Hopefully they do, because then I can clear this up a little bit more. Oh, be quiet. I've lost my train of thought. All right, I'll be back in 1 moment. All right, sorry about that. I thought while I was out, I would also fix up my hair. And I was rewatching what I was talking about before I sort of paused the recording. And the sound of through the microphone is like oddly satisfying for me. It's real strange. I like hearing people type with not overly loud keyboards through a microphone. It's like ASMR for nerds. It's kind of a redundant sentence, isn't it? Anyway, so yes, so this is hooked up to, every one of these buttons when they're clicked is hooked up to this function. All it does is toggle this enabled. Now that brings us to a nice segue into the second thing I've done. Now, if you've used the Unity game engine before, you'll have seen the little tick box in the transform, I believe it's stuck in, and all the sub objects of an object, the sub game objects of an object, sub objects of a game object. I don't remember which one's which. It's been a little while since I used Unity. Look at my hair. Now, the one thing I do miss about having short hair is that you were always ready for internet. Now I'm kind of only ever ready for radio. Excuse me. So, if you've used Unity, yes. Basically what it does is it toggles on and off different aspects of an object. Now, each one of those objects each one of those aspects is itself an object. And they are parented to the main object, basically. So that if you disable a child of the parent, the child gets disabled, and all of the children of the child gets disabled, but the parent and everything underneath that, except for the one you just clicked, obviously, gets left alone. If you disable the parent, everything underneath it gets disabled as well. There is a similar system in Qt, kind of. There's a parenting system, but I don't think it has disabled, enabled quite the same. But what I have done here is I've created a similar parenting system. So basically, we have an object. Now, the signal and slot doesn't need to use my object class. You can do that with any instance of any class that you want. Unlike Qt's version of it. which requires the QObject macro and the object base class, the QObject base class for the meta compiler to know what to run on. Oh, that's what else I wanted to talk about before I sort of jump over, sorry. Let's go back to the signal and slots. This thing. This is a pain in the ball sack to maintain. Just putting that one out there. What I did was, and this is the part I did on stream, so I actually created a code generator for the signal and slot. Now, the way this differs from the way Qt does with its meta compiler is, this actually creates a C++ file, or a header file, more specifically, with all of these macro defines in it. So this is a piece of tangible code that is compiled at compile time into the game engine. Now you could take this file, you could take the program that makes the file, and you could put it into your program and it would just work. It does not require any prerequisites except for having access to placeholders and functional, which I believe is C++ 9 or 11. Don't hold me to that because I'm probably really fucking wrong. And like this was my sort of initial, this is how it needs to work kind of thing. And what it does is, I've got a path I want the file to go to. I then want to generate the file. I'm going to go from 0 arguments to 10 arguments. And I'm going to call this generate macro. Generate macro has, first things first, I got the generate of the header, which is all the way at the top, I believe, which just puts the program once, which is your if def guards. Your 2 includes your using namespace standard placeholders. Yes, I know it's bad. I don't care. Which I really could easily change this, because I only have to modify like one line in this code and redefine it, recompile it, but I'm not going to. And then I've got the define of the emit. Now the /n's, because you are outputting to a text file, need to be there to make it all nice and neat, as you can see here. And I do it in such a way where the /n is on its own line, so it looks like kind of how it's going to come out. And then I actually go in through and generate the macro for the number of arguments. So define signal plus the number of arguments. I really should have converted this to an int, but because I'm not doing this for speed, I mean, it's going to save me like billionth of a second or some shit to convert this to an int first, to a string first, and then use that. I don't fucking care. Anyway, so it goes through basically and just creates line by line. So define signal and the number of arguments. It goes through this name, hash, and the number of arguments. That there. I also have this argument type generator thing, which basically it'll go through and add argument type A, argument type B, etc., 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 so that you can actually use those as part of the function calls and the storage. So while you do actually have to do at least one step before you can use it, technically speaking, you could just take this code file and take it away. You just don't have the advantage of being able to change one thing and have all of the 10 macros. If you want to have a 100 argument macro, you could just change the for loop in here, and you could have a 100 argument, signal and slot, which would fucking suck. Like, so bad, that would suck. But you could do it. You could definitely do it. And what I've got happening with this is, so there's a build dependency for the signal slot header generator, and there's also a pre-build step. Build events. So it actually goes and generates the signal and slot header. So if you were to change this guy here, it would recompile and it would be rerun, and this file would be regenerated. This file would be regenerated. So you're always up to date. This file is also not checked into my version control, so that the first time you actually compile it, this is created on the fly. And because it is done before as part of a dependency, so it's a pre-build step, so the compiler, the program that makes the file is a dependency, and it runs the program as a pre-build step, that will be there for you to use basically straight away. And yeah, so I'm going to segue back into whatever the fuck it was that I was saying, which I don't actually remember. Oh yeah, the enabled and disabled. So yeah, so this one does require the use of the object, simply because I could do it as like a void star or like a interface of some sort, but the object class itself has some pretty nifty features, like the HTTP dump, which I will load up. I'll do it over here so I don't accidentally bring up anything kind of strange. So all this stuff here, this is through the game engine. I've sort of come through this a few times, and you can sort of change attributes and stuff. Like, for example, I could change the position of this guy if I really wanted to like 100, 100, like 0. And then when I go into here and actually, yeah, it's up there. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't call all the functions that actually update my click boxes and stuff, so that's sort of a bad example. I do want to have sort of like a signal for like a callback for when the function is ran or something's changed on the web page, but for now it's not really a priority. This is mainly for debugging positions or looking at things, see if it's the right thing. Much like the Unity editor thing, it's not really meant while the game's running to give you any kind of really vast customization options. It's meant to be like little micro adjustments and stuff like that, and see debug information on the screen if you create your own editor view thing, whatever it's fucking called. Anyway, so the way the parent and child thing works, it's literally just, you have a parent, starts off as null, you have a child list, starts off as empty. So you see it defaults to null. And yeah, so we set the parent. This is other stuff that I've been through before a while back. It's irrelevant for the most part. That's the HTTP dump thing. And here, wow, that was stupid. I'm glad that was never being called. Final references, was it ever being called? No, it wasn't. That was really bad code. Like, Jesus Christ. Anyway, so if you were to set a parent of this, actually what it does is it will set your parent and also push you onto the child list. And inversely, if you add a child, is to do the opposite. It'll push you onto the child list and then set the child's parent to you. I don't want to call the functions directly because it'll be like, I'd need some kind of logic to say, oh, you've already set the parent to yourself, so don't continue with the next part, but the first time you want to do it. And I don't like that. I'd rather just sort of manually do it. Yeah, there's a remove function. Why wasn't I using that? Whatever. And here's the sort of magic here. So you got toggle enabled, which basically just sort of flips the enabled. Nothing too special. It's just like m enabled equals not m enabled kind of thing. But because I have to actually call the functions and do some code on it, it's a little bit different. Is enabled just returns the bool. Now this is where the fun bit happens. So when you enable or disable a child object, it goes through the child list and enables or disables all the children as well. And of course, because I'm calling the function, if the children have children, babies having babies, if the children have children, it will also disable that or also enable that, and then so on and so forth. So why is this useful? Well, if you have been around for a while and kept up with this, I'll go back to my single state in my state machine because, of course, I have this render function here. Now it was more of a segregation kind of thing. So you do all your logic in the logic function, or what do they call it? Yeah, logic. And you do all your render calls in the render function. There was no need to it. You can call render in the logic and logic in the render. It doesn't really matter. But what you would have to do is every single thing you wanted on screen, you'd have to go and call the render function. But now, because I have this enabled and disabled bit, I can go, whenever this object is enabled, render it. It's a renderable, it needs to be rendered to the screen unless we tell it to not be rendered to the screen. It has the added bonus of not having to do an extra function call for everything on the screen. Now, if you imagine something like, I don't know, what games have come out recently? That's 2D games, like something like Binding of Isaac. It's a little bit old. But you have every single square on the thing. You have Isaac and all of his modifications. You have his tiers. You have all the enemies. You have all the enemy modifications. You have the HUD. All that stuff would require just fucking hundreds of render calls, and that would be really shit to maintain, I would imagine. So this way, as soon as you actually go and create the sprite, it becomes enabled by default. Or if you go and create a button, it's enabled by default, which I can show you here. It's actually enabled by default. And the other thing is, just to mention here, when I set a parent or I set a child, I don't actually modify its state, because I could want certain things enabled or disabled, and I don't want it to be modified unless I explicitly modify it after it's been parented, because that makes more sense in my mind. You could do it either way, but if you were to disable something, parent it, and you have to disable it again, that's kind of silly. So the way I've used this, I've used it, of course, in the rendering, but also in the click interface. So it doesn't actually check if the click is happening unless it's enabled. You don't want to be trying to, and this is something that actually drove me to implement this, you don't want to be clicking when something isn't there and it works. The code for this actually toggles the enabled, it doesn't disable it. And when you would actually click the space, like here, it would re-enable it, would bring it back up, which is of course not what you want. It's disabled, you don't want it to be doing anything. So now that does that, I actually parent all the buttons to the inventory display object, which you can do you can do the same thing in Unity. You can create an empty game object, or even one with code in it, or whatever else, and you can disable and enable that, and we'll flip everything below it. When I was using Unity, I'd use that a lot to sort of neaten up having like a game map or something, like a tile-based map is all I ever did, and also ease of disabling and enabled lots of things at once. I had something like it was a board game I was making, like a video version of a board game, and I had the tiles all mapped to one game object, and I had the cards with like 8 or 10 different objects underneath mapped to one empty game object, and I would just be able to enable and disable that all at once. All this talking shit's bad for my voice. So yeah, and all this does is it toggles the enabled for the inventory display, and it also disables all the blocks underneath it too. So when you click here, it doesn't do anything, but when I click here, it gets rid of it. Now I'm also using a button here. If you can see, sort of down here, I'm just changing the item. That was just me testing the click interface and the item interface too a little while back. Sorry, someone sent me a really silly message and it was cute. I just said cute. I can't be manly if I keep saying cute. So that's how that works. If I was to sort of go to my state and go, if I hit yes, dick, funny, V, if I want to, what's it called? Test sprite. Oops. Now, I haven't finished doing this enable and disable for everything yet. Dot toggle. Yep. Do not give me underlines. Ah, great. Interesting. Because I've been refactoring a lot of the classes and stuff. Like it's got this and this. Like a sprite isn't updatable. So that should just be that, I think. And I shouldn't need to call that directly anymore. Or that. I hope I haven't broken anything too much there. Yeah. So hopefully that fixes that. But I'm slowly going through. I only did this like a couple of nights ago and got it working properly. So last night. Pretty sure I was in bed last night getting this working for the rendering at the very least, because I have to... Oh, for fuck's sake. What have I done? Christ. Okay. You know what? Let's just undo everything I just did. I'm sure a sprite's an updatable now. It's a renderable. Oh, right. The Sideshow Bob thing. Because both paths have it enabled. Oh, I hate ambiguous overloading. Anyway, I'll fix it up at some other point, and I will make my point using the E. What is the E? The E is the button. So button. The down here. Button. There we go. So this is sort of, yeah. Unfortunately, like that's an issue I'm gonna have to resolve because of the way I've designed it. I've been doing this the last like 8-10 years, something like that. So if I push V, it removes it from the update queue, and I can no longer click it. The item doesn't change. Now it's back, and it renders and blah blah blah. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while, and I've learned a lot since finishing uni. Like I was a decent coder when I finished uni, but since then I've learned so much about like code design rather than just actually implementing, and a lot has changed in me. So that is something I will have to resolve at some point, but today is not that day. Yeah, that's annoying. I'm not sure how to resolve that, to be honest. I'm sure I'll come up with something. Yeah. I don't know. I really don't want to have to fuck around with that. That's really goddamn annoying. Because of the way it comes back. I'd have to redo this whole thing, and I really don't want to. Oh yeah, I made a file type, didn't I? I forgot all about that. Yeah, so that's just some stuff I've been working on. Fucking dogs, I swear to God. Some stuff I've been working on for this. It's rapidly sort of progressed to something that's a little bit more usable recently, and I'm actually really happy with it. And I know, like, programmer issues is like, it looks like nothing. I understand that it looks like it's nothing at all, but it's what I have done that I'm actually quite proud of, a lot of it. And hopefully I actually get to make a game on it at some point. I mean, I'm designing a game, I'm designing tools for a game, designing the missions and levels and all the lore and stuff in my head. I really should write it down, but I've just been lazy, and I really should. But yeah, hopefully a lot more programming streams coming up where I actually get stuff done, where it's actually visible to you that something's being done, instead of me just sort of waffling on about, yeah, you know, I spent 3 hours implementing a signal slot system and no one gives a flying fuck except for me, which I don't blame you. But that's just it, I guess. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to stop rambling on because I've lost my train of thought. I don't think I have anything else interesting to show you. If you have any questions, if you want me to go into any more depth about any of the stuff I've talked about or any of the other stuff in my game engine, just let us know below, or tweet me, or, I mean, if you have my email, that's kind of creepy, but feel free to use that as well. If you have my phone number, just please don't kill me. But you can call me, I guess. And yeah, that's about it. I will hopefully catch you all on the next episode of I'm Talking Shit About Stuff No One Cares About. Goodbye.